Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is The Power of Placemaking. Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer for the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, Mark Wallace.
Well, good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Sandy Brua and the Detroit Regional Chamber for inviting me here today. The topic of civility is very intriguing, and I think it has a lot of relevance for Detroit as our city is going through a period of rapid growth and change. It's interesting to follow Dr. Vitti and Chief Craig, both of whom I admire very much. I came to Detroit in 1999 as a Detroit public school teacher. I taught English and econ, and I was also tapped to run the yearbook, which sounds great as a young teacher. It means you end up spending a lot of time in a car driving around the city, going to track meets, basketball games, and football games. And that's how I was really introduced to this place. And I continue to see the city of Detroit through the eyes of my students. My second year as a teacher, I had the opportunity to schedule a field trip to Mexican Town. And as we were driving south on I-75 and we came under the Woodward Bridge, up in the sky, you see the Ambassador Bridge. And one of my students, who was a junior at the time, pointed to the bridge. He said, "Yo, Wallace, what's that?" I said, "Well, it's the Ambassador Bridge." And he said, "Where does it go?" I said, "Well, it goes to Canada." And he asked if we could go and see it. So I called the audible and decided to take a detour. And we ended up at the foot of West Grand Boulevard in Riverside Park. And my students were understandably fascinated by the bridge itself. They took a lot of pictures. They were interested in the Detroit River. But I couldn't get over the fact that a 17-year-old who had spent his entire life in Detroit had never seen the Ambassador Bridge. And I couldn't believe the condition of the park. This is Riverside Park in 2001. And 2 years later, in 2003, Matt Cullen and Faye Nelson and some of my personal heroes got together and started the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. And the goal was pretty simple. They wanted to make sure that kids from Detroit never had to play on broken swings over puddles of mud along the Detroit riverfront. The Conservancy was founded with three simple promises. We promised the community that we would be a good steward of the riverfront. We also promised that the Riverwalk would be a world-class gathering place, and this is our aspiration. Finally, we promised that the riverfront would always be a place where everyone felt welcome and everyone felt respected. And today, the Detroit riverfront is the most diverse gathering place anywhere in the state of Michigan. People come to the riverfront for recreation. They come to the riverfront to interact with nature. They come to the riverfront to escape the stress of the city here. And people come to the riverfront because they know it's a place where they'll meet different people, and they know it's a place where they will be respected. My student who had never seen the Ambassador Bridge grew up in a context of extreme isolation, and most people in our region live similarly isolated lives. If you look at what we have done as a region, we've been very successful in creating a space that's segregated. We invested in freeways, we built suburbs, and we've begun to have fewer and fewer opportunities to encounter people from different backgrounds. Diversity is a precedent condition for civility. If people from the same backgrounds with the same opinions always come together, there's no need for civility because there's no conflict, there's no disagreement in that space. It's the choir preaching to the choir. So my thesis for today is simple. For civility to occur, people who are different must meet in a common place. That place can be virtual, Facebook, Twitter, but those algorithms are set up to sort of drive us into our own corners and drive us into those ecosystems where you're only hearing the reverberation of people with common opinions. Physical spaces like the Detroit riverfront have a profound impact on the way we interact with each other. So today I'm going to give you a quick history of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy and the strategies that we've used to make sure that we remain a diverse gathering place where civility is encouraged. I'd be remiss if I didn't start by saying we were founded by three amazing partners who came together. General Motors built the first portion of the riverfront from the Renaissance Center down to the carousel at Rivard Plaza. The Kresge Foundation showed unbelievable leadership with a $50 million challenge grant that allowed the riverfront to come together. And the city of Detroit led the way in relocating the cement silos that had punctuated the riverfront for years and were really the reason that no one was accessible to the water. The transformation is something we're very proud of, and we've fundamentally changed the way the community works. If you look at this image of Atwater Street, circa 2003, you'll realize that 2 blocks away from General Motors World Headquarters, it was not a place you would bring your family members, it's not a place you would bring your grandparents, and definitely not a place you'd want to bring kids. That context has been radically transformed into a beautiful state park, beautiful plazas and pavilions. Rivard Plaza is one of my favorite places along the riverfront, and a lot of times when people mention the Riverwalk, this is what they're thinking of. We have a great carousel. Wheelhouse Detroit started the first and only bike store in Detroit for several years. When you go downriver, you start to see places like Mount Elliott Park. There are thousands of kids in Detroit whose families can't afford to take them to Cedar Point. And this is a place they can come down, be respected, splash around all day. You hear laughter constantly in these places, and they've really transformed the experience that children and families have. Gabriel Richard Park, similarly, was a city park which has been transformed into a series of butterfly gardens and ADA-accessible fishing piers for folks who are in wheelchairs. These places have captured the imagination of our city and our region, and they're places where everyone in Detroit feels proud. We measure our impact on what we've done based on how we're changing people's lives, and we've been very successful at hosting programming that really allows people to interact with the waterfront for a first time and allows time and moments for those civil interactions to occur. One of the programs we're most proud of is the Fishing Festival, where families and kids from the city of Detroit are actually interacting with law enforcement officers who are giving them fishing poles, putting the worms on the hooks, and teaching the little kids how to fish. We always have a trophy that's about 7 feet tall, and the little kids who win that trophy are usually about 3 feet tall. So it's a really fun moment for families to make these sorts of memories. The Reading and Rhythm program, you see Debbie Dingle, who spoke earlier today, is really a great opportunity for kids to get excited about learning and reading in particular. Yoga on the riverfront is not something I participate in because nobody wants to see that. I could probably do the night yoga, which we've branded Gloga, but I try to avoid those sessions as well. These are just great opportunities for people to build memories along the riverfront, and our space is a place that we think of as a neutral host location. We want people to feel welcome to bring their programs to us, and in so doing, we have these authentic groups which have transplanted their activity to the riverfront and really are starting to make memories and change the way our region interacts. Touch a Truck is one of the newest events that we rolled out for West Riverfront Park, where kids have an opportunity to interact with law enforcement officials, firemen, people who are running ambulances. It's really a great day. It's a noisy day, as is River Days, which is the unofficial kickoff of summer every year, where we welcome about 150,000 of our closest friends to celebrate the end of winter and the start of the summer season. When you look at the statistics and the accomplishment of the organization, we're very proud that we've become one of the most popular gathering spaces anywhere in the region. 3 million visitors on an annual basis, of which over 300,000 participate in our programming. More importantly than that, if you break down who is coming to the riverfront, you see about 40% suburban, about 40% city, and 20% coming from outside of the region. It's a great calling card for the state of Michigan and for Detroit. And it's also one of the few places where you see that suburban and city interaction starting to take place. So how did we accomplish this? How did we create a place that brings people together and sets the table for civility? And I'd like to talk about 3 strategies that we've used as an organization to make sure that the riverfront is a place where everyone feels welcome and respected. The first of those strategies is listen to everyone. You'll see some of the old school khaki pants here in this picture from 2003. Before we started construction in 2006, the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy hosted over 100 community meetings to listen to our community partners, to listen to our neighbors, and hear what they'd like to see along the riverfront. We were very intentional about asking for input, and we learned a lot through this process. And one of the things we learned is there was a lot of distrust. A lot of folks in the community didn't believe we were going to do what we said we would, and we knew that that was something that was very important, and that integrity of our word has really guided our organization since 2003. We've really accelerated that process recently, and last year as part of the East Riverfront Framework process, we hosted a series of boat tours, we hosted a lot of walk and learns, we hosted bike rides, where our design team and our engineering team could actually listen to the community and hear what they'd like to see on the East Riverfront. That process yielded some significant results, and two ideas that came from the city, from our residents, which we are deploying now, I'd like to talk about today. One of those is the Joseph Campo Greenway. I'm sure you've all experienced the DeQuinter Cut, which is a beautiful opportunity for kids to walk from Eastern Market down to the riverfront. And the community members came to us and said, we'd like more DeQuinter Cuts. And initially, we sort of looked at ourselves and said, well, there's only one train line that could be turned into a walking path. We don't have another one of those. And one of the community members came up to us and said, yeah, you do. There's actually a path that winds behind the Ralph Bunch homes. It touches 2 different schools. It goes all the way from Verner to Jefferson, and then it stops because there's a parking lot with a fence right there. If you could change that parking lot into a trail, you unlock a 2-mile pathway that welcomes all the families who live in that neighborhood straight down to the waterfront. We didn't know that. We learned that from the community, we learned that by listening, and this space, this year, will be transformed into a beautiful walkway. The city of Detroit is leading that transformation. We also heard from the community that when you look at the riverfront, it's a series of great spaces for families with one enormous dead zone right in the middle. So if you think about the Rensen, it's a great place for kids to splash around. If you think about the carousel at Rivard, it's a great place for families to come down and rent bikes. And you got to go all the way down to Mount Elliott Park before you get to that water park that I showed in the previous slides. And there's a big gap right there. There's not a place for restrooms for little kids. There's not a place for shade for parents. So they pointed to this site, which had previously been envisioned as a new apartment building. They said, we don't care about another apartment building. We want this to be another park. And the idea that came out of that process was this concept of Atwater Beach. So instead of seeing a private building with a fence around it, this site right at the foot of Joseph Campo, across the street from Andrews, is going to be transformed into a beautiful beach experience for families and kids to enjoy for the next 100 years. And we're really proud of that. We're also committed to building together with the community. Our next big project is West Riverfront Park, which is a 22-acre parcel on the west side, just on the other side of Joe Louis Arena. And we have really gone deep with the community to help educate them about what park designs are available throughout the world and bring some of that learning back here to Detroit to guide what we do. We've hosted events like this one with high school students, and we assembled a group of community advisors, 21 really special people who are really good friends with their neighbors, they're people who understand the city, and we took them on field trips. We piled them in a bus. In this case, it was an airplane, and we flew them to Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia so that they could see some of the greatest parks our country has to offer, learn what parks are possible to build, and bring that learning back here to Detroit. This is a really special group of people. A lot of times when you go to a city council meeting, you see the same 50 or 100 people there, and that's a really important thing. Those folks are doing important work for our community. But we wanted people who were sort of the unusual suspects, folks who didn't always get their voices heard, and we wanted to listen to them very carefully. We learned a lot through that process, and took all that feedback and gave it to our design teams. And the designs that have recently been put out in the press were all guided by that input, including this session here at 1001 Woodward with a bunch of high school students from the Optimist Club and from Teen Hype. One of the other things we've done is we've started doing everything in public as much as possible. So we invited a bunch of students to see the design teams present their concepts, and we opened those up to the public as a free event, and it really turned into a party. People were really excited to see geniuses talking about what the future of this Detroit space could look like. So you'll see our jury on the side, and you'll see the audience was front and center in these presentations. This is Michael Van Valkenburg, who designs Brooklyn Bridge Park, and Maggie Daley Park, and Millennium Park in Chicago. So some really amazing people came into town to help us think about the future of the space. Some of the feedback was funny, some of it was meaningful. I really liked this. I assume it was a guy who said, my dream for West Riverfront Park is ice cream for my girlfriend. Next to that, you see, I love the Michael Van Valkenburg concept, building a model showing winter activities, shows a real understanding. So again, we learned from all of this feedback, and we've become very focused on pulling that in as an organization. One of the other things we're really committed to in terms of public space transformation is adapting to the way the community uses the space. This is the back of the Renaissance Center, right after General Motors purchased the building. You'll see that the waterfront was being used as a parking lot, which obviously is not the best use for that space. That space was transformed into a beautiful fountain, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And I like this picture because I don't like this picture. This was taken by the architect who designed that fountain. And initially, that fountain was exactly what you see here. It was a piece of sculpture. It was not intended for public use. It wasn't a place where kids could splash around. It's just something that goes out inside of a corporate facility. And over time, the community of Detroit said, no, we don't believe that. This is a place where kids should be able to splash around and get wet. And General Motors should be really commended for 1,000 things. But in this case, they really stepped up. They said, yeah, let's start putting chlorine in the water. Let's modify some of these systems so that it's safe for kids, so that it's a great experience for children. And it's really become one of the great swimming pools in effect for our community. So amazing leadership at General Motors, and allowing the community to dictate what the space becomes is really a key part of what we do as an organization. One of the other places that I love, and I mentioned earlier, is the DeQuinder Cut, which we also manage. This was a former rail line, which was converted into a walking trail. But you'll see, even before it was transformed, this is a place people were walking. It's always been a place where people had traveled. It just wasn't that safe until we transformed it into a beautiful pathway for biking and for walking. Again, this image doesn't have any people in it. And when you start to add the people into this space, you realize how special these moments can become. One of the things I love about the DeQuinder Cut is I'm starting to see families bring their little kids down to the DeQuinder Cut to learn how to ride their bikes. Because there are no cars, there's no concrete that's busted up, there's no potholes. It's a place where you can really be safe, you can be out of that context. And it's great that kids are having those memories here, because I remember my dad teaching me how to ride a bike. And those things are happening in the purview of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. So, in conclusion, this room is full of leaders, and I didn't want to leave you without a call to action. In your professional work, each one of you will have opportunities to support these public spaces. These are places where people can be themselves, and these are places where people can feel respected. This is essential to our region, and we need to maintain and protect these spaces if we want to encourage a culture of civility. So when you see those opportunities, please embrace them and help places like the Riverwalk remain world-class gathering places for all. Thank you.